Good afternoon. I am Andrea Chisholm with the Midday News. Special welcome if you're watching on onespotmedia.com. A reminder as well that you can download our One Spot Media app in the Google Play Store or the App Store. That's the number 1 followed by the words Spot and Media. On the heels of Monday's quadruple killing in Mount Carmel, Hanover, another community in the parish was rocked by a deadly attack by gunmen yesterday evening. 71-year-old butcher Joel Malcolm was shot dead, and 63-year-old pensioner Hereford Johnson was injured at their home in Malcolm Heights, Lucea, sometime after 7. It's reported that they were watching television when explosions were heard outside the house. Gunmen then kicked open a back door, firing several shots, hitting Miss Johnson and Mr. Malcolm. The two-bedroom house was then set ablaze. Mr. Malcolm's son was reportedly killed 2 weeks ago in his shop in Lucea. With the government intensifying efforts to pass the special anti-crime legislation by the end of this month, members of the legal and human rights communities are pointing to limitations in the Special Zones of Special Operations Bill. They want those limitations to be addressed before it becomes law. President of the Jamaican Bar Association, Jacqueline Cummings, says there has not been enough consultation with the legal community, and this could lead to problems in the implementation of the law.
Yes, as we always pass laws, regulations comes later. But when are we going to get the regulations? And before they pass a law, let them go around and teach the members of the prosecution team, the police force, and the attorneys what it is that their aim is, that when the law is passed, we all know what it is it's all about.
Under the proposed legislation, the Prime Minister, on the advice of the National Security Council, can declare any high-crime area as a zone for special security operations. Ms. Cummings adds that the law as proposed is similar to the Suppression of Crimes Act passed years ago, which was subject to abuse by some members of the security forces until it was repealed.
What we don't want is to revisit that same act with even more powers in the police, and we're back to square one where we were back in the early 80s. Citizens' rights must be paramount in the government's eyes. Yes, I understand we're in a crisis, but we have to be able to manage that crisis without infringing the rights of our citizenry, because our citizenry are the ones who we are supposed to protect.
And the human rights community is hinting at confusion for the security forces if the Zones of Special Operations Bill is passed in its current form. Human rights advocate Susan Goff says the specific powers for the security forces in designated zones need to be clear, as well as the period in which the powers would exist. Speaking yesterday on RGR's Beyond the Headlines, Mrs. Goff pointed out that there were potential problems and limitations.
Because there will be certain designated geographical areas which will fall under the provisions of this bill for a period of time. The rest of the time, they will function under the existing law. And outside of those zones, the existing law will prevail. So there is the potential here for confusion among the members of the security forces operating within a zoned area, a designated area, outside of a designated area. So this is one of the things that I think has to be done prior to the passage of this act.
Patrick Powell is to take the witness stand at his trial today. He's being tried in the St. Andrew Parish Court for failing to hand over his licensed firearm to the authorities during the investigations into the 2011 shooting of 17-year-old Kajil Mays. Yesterday, Judge Vaughan Smith rejected an application by Mr. Powell's attorneys for the case to be dismissed, arguing that Mr. Powell has a case to answer. Powell was freed of Kajil's murder last year. The Porus High student accused of the murder of his schoolmate is scheduled to appear in court today for a bail hearing. The 16-year-old was charged last week with a fatal stabbing of 17-year-old Renaldo Dixon. Renaldo was killed during an altercation on the school compound on June 7. Details have emerged on the shortage of police personnel in the Jamaica Constabulary Force. The 2016 Economic and Social Survey shows the force was 20% below its establishment. There were 14,091 posts in the JCF. However, it ended 2016 with 11,233 police personnel. The shortage was evident at the rank-and-file level. The police force has positions for 8,903 constables, but as at December 31, it had 6,396 members at that rank. During the year, 643 persons enlisted in the JCF, while 549 persons left. This was mainly due to resignation, retirement, and death. The business sector of Montego Bay St. James has donated bedding and office supplies to the Barnett Street Police Station, which has been in disrepair for some time. Second Vice President of the Montego Bay Chamber of Commerce, Brian Brown, says the business community wanted to provide suitable living conditions for the police, some of whom live at the station.
Rush Marketing donated 3 fans and a television set because when the officers are on downtime, we think they should really be on downtime and be able to relax. Paint Plus donated several gallons of paint, stationery and office supplies, donated 3 lockers because we needed to really improve that storage facility in the barracks. And Beauty Queen donated 6 mattresses because the ones that we saw were really not in a state that was really fit for sleeping.
We are very grateful for these donations, and this is just to show that the Chamber of Commerce, the business community in and around Montego Bay are on board to assist the police in any way that they can, and what they have done for us today is immeasurable, and I say wholeheartedly thank you all.
The police in Highgate St. Mary are asking persons to come to the station to identify items which may have been stolen from them. The police recovered the items following reports of burglary and larceny on April 22.
And this investigation led us to an abandoned building. The police proceeded to that location, and one man was observed jumping through a window. A subsequent search was conducted of the premises, and the police actually recovered items of cell phones, rings, laptop computers, chains, earphones, among other things.
A public passenger vehicle, a coaster bus, caught fire yesterday afternoon on Molynes Road, St. Andrew. The driver of the bus, Seymour Reed, said between 2 and 3 p.m. he was traveling from Portmore to fix the bus's water pump when he saw smoke coming from a section of the bus.
So go outside now and bend down and look and see a portion of smoke develop, and then I tried to get some sun and all them things, but all that couldn't work. My health couldn't work, and I get some assistance from next door, and then began to help me. So therefore, the fire get away.
Mr. Reed said he was assisted by 2 men with fire extinguishers, but the damage was far gone. The bus, which operates from Water Meadows to downtown Kingston, had no passengers on board. The owner of the bus said it's a big loss for him. An explanation has been given for the low water pressure which hampered firefighters who battled Monday night's blaze which destroyed the Redemption Arcade in downtown Kingston. The National Water Commission (NWC) has linked the damage to the Yalas pipeline. When our news team arrived shortly after the fire started, several vendors complained that some of their goods could have been saved if firefighters had access to an adequate supply of water. NWC Corporate Public Relations Manager Charles Buchanan disclosed that the Yalas pipeline was damaged during the last month's heavy rains.
Long infrastructure that takes water from the Yalas and Negro rivers into the Mona Reservoir, from which we then treat water either at the Mona water treatment plant or in some instances pump water over to the Hope filter plant for treatment and distribution to our customers. So what has happened is that because of the Yalas pipeline being out of operation, we have been having a situation where the pressure during the night has been controlled so as to limit the rate of decline.
And while speaking on RGR's Beyond the Headlines yesterday, Mr. Buchanan outlined how the NWC responded to Monday night's emergency at the Redemption Arcade.
Our Vice President for Operations actually received a call sometime perhaps after midnight in the first instance from the fire service requesting any assistance in increasing the pressure in the vicinity of the fire. He gave immediate instructions to the night crew to take steps to increase the pressure in the area, and that was done somewhere around 1 o'clock in the night.
The Latin American and Caribbean group yesterday opened its chemical weapon convention in Montego Bay. The convention will focus on chemical warfare and ways the region can prepare for the threat. According to Chief Medical Officer Dr. Winston Delahaye, there needs to be a constant state of preparedness within the health sector.
The magnitude of the possible effects on civilian populations of their use or threatened use obliges governments both to seek to prevent such use and to prepare response plans, which can and should be developed as an integral part of existing national emergency and public health plans. The threat of the release of chemical weapons remains a public health risk that requires a state of readiness within the sector.
He says the threat of chemical weaponry is ever present.
We must therefore take the necessary steps to enforce that prohibition in respect of persons within our jurisdiction, and note that one of our most important obligations under the Convention is the destruction of chemical weapons.
And in sports, Dr. Warren Blair says the Jamaica Olympic Association had no compelling reason to review its selection policy for the National Senior Championships despite controversy over team selection last year.
Former national discus record holder Jason Morgan could not find a place on Jamaica's Olympic team last year, despite meeting the qualifying standard after finishing outside the top 3 at the national championships. However, long jumper Aubrey Smith, who also finished outside the top 3 in his event, was given a place on the team after earlier attaining the qualifying standard. Despite this, Dr. Blake doesn't believe that anything needs to change in the country's selection criteria, which states that only athletes finishing in the top 3 of their event or those who have a wildcard entry will automatically qualify for the championships, barring a medical exemption.
The selection policy does not speak of automatically going to the games if you are qualified. It speaks of earning your place in the games based on your finishing. And we were taken to CAS over that event, and CAS sided with the J Trades, and it says it will not interfere with the right of any federation to choose their representatives.
Officials were also put under a microscope for decisions made at last year's championships, and chairman of the organizing committee, Ludlow Watts, addressed that concern.
There was one aspect that things did not work as should have been, but that's the only instance in the history, in modern history then, that we ever had any such situation that could be considered not clean and clinical.
And when asked whether the officiating, specifically with regards to the issuance of false starts, will be different this year, Watts would only offer this response.
The officiating, as far as that area is concerned, will be clean and clinical.
The National Senior Championships will run from June 22 to 25 at the National Stadium, with live coverage on TVJ, TVJSN and OneSpotMedia.com, and extensive radio coverage on Hits 92 FM. Jordan Fort, TVJ Sports.
And that's the Midday News. I'm Andrea Chisholm. Remember to join us at 7 for Primetime News. On behalf of the news, sports and production teams, good afternoon.